Hello and welcome everyone to day 2 of the Digital Citizen Summit. Yesterday, we conducted over 15 sessions that only in the Digital Citizen Summit, along with the other tracks that focused on the topics of accountability, platforms, and connecting the unconnected through ethical use of digital. Today, we continue this conversation and bring more voices, diverse stakeholders, and voices of the community members to you. To kick off, the first session in this room is on fighting misinformation in a digital world and the economization of misinformation. To do this, I would like to invite our moderator for this session, Akanksha Aluwalia from Digital Empowerment Foundation, to come and take over the session proceedings. And we have in this panel Ms. Uma Kalkar, who is the strategy lead with AI Safety Connect. We have with us Syed Haroon from SFLC and a message from Pankaj Pachauri, sir, online. Thank you. Please come.
Thank you. I know that misinformation is not something people want to talk about at 10 in the morning, but it is something that targets everybody. So it's a very relevant conversation to have, especially in a room where we have students, we have older people, we have experts, and we have stakeholders that look after community-driven solutions as well. So thank you so much. Thank you to Uma and Syed for being a part of this panel. Two very different voices that will be able to connect the idea of misinformation to different subjects that play a role when it talks about spams, when it talks about understanding the way that misinformation spreads and the nuances that comes into play in a diverse country like India. To start off with, we have a small video message. It's actually not small, but a small video message by Mr. Pankaj Pachauri, the founder of Go News, to talk to you about how misinformation penetrates media houses, journalism, where it derails the idea of what's true and derails the idea of what information really means, coming from sources that you're supposed to trust, that you're supposed to embed in your life, and also information that plays a very important role in understanding how you take the next steps. Sekat, can we have his message, please?
Right now, currently, we have something called the international information and AI industry. And I put all that in quotes because when you use information, it could be disinformation and misinformation. We heard the Prime Minister yesterday who talked about that harmony is very boring. Peace is very difficult to talk about and to disseminate. We also heard that peace is undefined and war is defined. So what we are up against, and the biggest thing I think we are up against are the social media. One meme, one short video, and one reel, as they are called, can be a setback for this process and can do unwanted damage. And that's because of this situation we are living in, which is something like we keep talking about climate change. I'll come to that later. But we have a total crisis in information world of the same level as pollution across the world and the climate which has been changed. There's chaos, there's challenges, and there will be course correction. Currently, we have 8.25 billion people, out of which 8.79 billion people are connected by more people. There are more phones than the population of the world. Out of which we have individuals using internet about 6 billion, out of which 5.66 billion are on social media, which, by the way, is used by 53% of people for their news consumption. The big companies, they want to keep going into new areas because the markets are getting saturated. The markets which have got saturated are Northern Europe, Western Europe, Northern America, Central America, I'm not talking about China, which has a 90% saturation point of connectivity. The only new markets which are coming up where there's some scope of expansion are in South Asia, which is my region, and Africa, Middle Africa, and Eastern Africa. And who are this? And what's happening today? You can see what happens on the internet in a single day. That there are 330 billion of emails sent, and there is Facebook posts are like 2.5 billion of Facebook posts. Can you imagine? Half of the people who are on social media are on Facebook, and they're sending stuff every day, and which is nothing compared to what people are consuming on your YouTube lives and videos. 1.4 billion hours are streamed in one day across the globe. 24 billion texts are sent. And one thing which I'm not including here is WhatsApp. WhatsApp is out of this consideration because it's encrypted and there's no data available in WhatsApp. It must be with the people who are running WhatsApp, the data people, but we don't have anything. So, well, for fun, you have 1.6 billion of Tinder swipes in a day. There's so many you don't need. So, who is winning as this market is increasing exponentially each year? There are only 7 companies which are winning. Today, Standards & Poor has 500 companies listed in the United States. 7 companies have 35% of that market cap. 7 companies out of all these companies. And how are they winning? Their market valuation after COVID has gone up by 233%. They are the largest influencer of societies and politics, and they are all under California laws. Their total market capitalization is $20 trillion. They are the second largest economy in the world. Their CEOs and their founders, they behave like state heads. I know at least in India, when Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Gates, and they come involving Satya Nadella, who's an Indian, by the way, the Prime Minister picks up the phone and then they go and tweet about it. So I talk to the Indian Prime Minister. So this is how big this economy is. As I said, their share in the US economy is growing every day. You can see that going up after the COVID day, and especially after AI was adopted 2 or 3 years ago. Now, you would say that why I'm talking about all this? I'm talking about all this because of this new infrastructure of news. People are watching news from what he was talking about, not from mainstream media, but on their platforms. When Israel attacked Gaza, people were getting their news about this attack from a TikToker whose name is News Daddy. His real name is Dylan Page. He had 500,000 views live for his TikTok when the BBC and the New York Times had a few thousand people watching live at that time. And that is because of the algorithms. If there is what they call traction, the algorithm changes the traction and more people keep coming to you. And that's how it's done. That a 25-year-old man sitting in a garage in England somewhere is broadcasting to the world the most serious, sincere, and dangerous war which we've seen in the last 2 years. So, after the adoption of AI and all these algorithms, democracy is in peril everywhere. You can start a war tomorrow. We just had a war with Pakistan, and there was one war which was being fought in the air across the border, and there was second war which was being fought on social media in both the countries. And if you don't believe me that this is really, really dangerous for democracy, please listen to Elon Musk. Don't believe me. This is what he did. He bought Twitter for $44 billion before the election. And he claimed that if he had not done that, Trump won't have won this time round. He's on record saying that. But well, he fell out with his boss. But soon after that, this is what he was doing. Fight back or die. Musk tells UK rally to topple the government. No head of the state can say these kind of things, but these people, they behave like head of states. They behave like sovereign, multi-continental communication czars. Same here in Nepal. Across the South Asia, we have seen governments changing in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, and in Maldives, just recently. And they were all led by social media groups. And we've had a problem with all our, even if India, even if it tries to be friends with its neighbors, you cannot talk about peace. This is the core subject of this conference. Because the minute I say I love Pakistan, there will be like 3 million people after my life. You can't even say anything positive about Pakistan anymore. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind when you are talking about this peace process with your neighbors. It's very important. The parliament, Indian parliament, is now trying to develop some sort of an AI law. So they had earlier a social media law which didn't work, and this AI law will not work because all these companies are working under the California law, and India's writ doesn't reach there. So either we become like China, we ban everyone and have our own system, but we can't do that because Indian government today has 1,700 apps from your birth registration to your death certificate and everything in between, your college scholarship, your driving license, your passport license, your entry into the airport, everything is on these apps. And there are only 2 companies in the world which make these apps, one on Android and one on iOS. So we have become like, I feel sometimes that we are becoming hostage to some company over which Indian laws have no control. So now this is true dystopia. Okay? Because everyone actually is on TikTok and on Facebook and X, Twitter and all that. And sometimes you have fun. Sometimes you get very good information, which is very useful. Most of the information that you've just seen is actually from the social media. I'm not taking credit for all these things. So what can we do? As civil societies, we can do 3 C's. Number 1, call out misinformation or disinformation. Collaborate with others, like-minded people who like good information online. And the 3rd C is create factual information. Those are the 3 C's as think tanks, as NGOs, as people we can do. And what can the governments do or the regulators do? 3 things. Transparency of the product. So all across the globe, it's written on every packet of cigarettes that it's injurious to your health. So why these great companies who are running this absolutely fabulous video making AI driven machines, they can't tell me that which content is AI and which content is not AI. You have to just make part of the video, end of the story, or the picture, or the graphic. It's very easy. They have the best brains in the world. Most of them are Indians, by the way. So, simple thing, you watermark that, like on the cigarette packets. Transparency. We have to ask for transparency as government and regulators. Number 2, you can tag. Second T is you can tag the origin of the online information. which country it's coming from, which area it's coming from. So people who are watching this disinformation, they know that this is coming from not a certified source. So that's the second thing they can do. Very easy to do is a technological thing. And the third is a bit difficult. And I come back to climate now. We as a race are fighting climate change. It has taken us 30 years. We are at COP 30 now. This is the 30th year of fighting that curse of climate change and how to deal with it. We have to find some sort of a treaty across the globe with these companies that what you can do and what you cannot do. We need that kind of groundswell. And then only they will listen. Otherwise, they are not going to listen to you. They are making huge amount of profits. They are on the top of the world. They are behaving like state heads, and they are like a word unto themselves. Hey, that's it. Now, right now, currently, we have something called the international.
Okay. Apologies for the very heavy morning start. But what's really, I think, important to talk about in today's age, particularly, is that all of us are digital citizens and all of us are overwhelmed. And somehow the idea of safeguarding the digital democracy has fallen on us as actors. And DCS is talking about accountability only because we must understand that accountability will never lie on the platforms alone. So, when it comes to misinformation and the nuances of misinformation, especially in a country like India, especially in an area like Asia Pacific, how do we understand that misinformation is not just digital, it's oral, it's community networks, it's also understanding that misinformation impacts everyone very differently? I actually want to start the panel with Syed and ask you the first question today. The context that we see in India and the research that we've seen, particularly with DEF, is that the main drivers of misinformation in our country is very political and very money oriented, right? Pankaj Pachauri coined this term last year at DCS, I remember, called the economy of misinformation. We're very increasingly economizing the idea that the spread of misinformation is going to be faster, but fighting it is always going to be slower, and there's going to be no incentivization behind it. So, in the work that you've done, what are the main drivers that you see of the misinformation that spreads in a country like India?
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me on this esteemed panel. I'm obviously listening to Sir and being here. This is a topic where we are exploring solutions right now. There's no straight answer, and how we have seen misinformation. It's not just a problem; it has become a hurdle to proceed with a democracy which is free, which has freedom of expression, which has trust. And with our experience, we have been working on misinformation, disinformation at SFLC, and have been pushing for advocacy and policy changes in this field. The one thing that drives misinformation in the society today is the lack of critical thinking, I would say. So, and as you have also pointed out in your opening remarks, that the spread of misinformation differs from one particular area to the other, where the urban areas do not have that faster spread of misinformation, but the semi-urban or rural ones have. It all depends on the low digital literacy there is, and the rapid and somewhat unregulated use of free access to the internet. I'm not advocating for regulation on the internet, but there has to be a literacy first. And this is something that's a step that we skipped in the past. And with this internet penetration combined with the lack of digital literacy, where one is believing everything that they see on the internet to be true, that becomes the major driver. And the second thing is our own biases which come into the action, where sir also spoke about the increase of of people relying on social media influences for specific news, while major platforms such as BBC were having very, very minimal views. The one thing that attracts uh, the misinformation and makes it exponentially large is because the influencers are not journalists. A media person has to be trained for information bias, for taking a stand which is neutral, for just speaking the facts. While in our research we have found that more and more people are relying on social media influencers for their news because they connect with them, and the connect comes from a bias which could be unconscious, which could be at the back of their head. It's not an active activity. This is something that is combined with the action. And other than that, there are obviously socio-political factors that play a strong role in this. So the religious and political polarization that comes into being, the hate speech. Obviously, this is all tagged with a bias. This is all tagged with a preconceived notion we might have for a particular gender, religion, or a particular situation, for that matter. And the last part is the platform. As Sir has also spoken about, the majority of the platforms uh, being sorry, I'm recollecting the name of what we call it, but a proprietary platform, which are based in a particular country and are governed by their laws. That also combined with the vendor lock-in situation we have with most of these platforms, where we do not have the alternative, and we have to just understand the regulation they have. So that's the third factor, where how a platform works, how their structure is, and what their algorithmic situation is for escalating a content or pushing down a content. That also really helps. So we're living in a society today where misinformation is not just uh, being pushed by one means but multiple means, and for anyone who wants to uh, live in a society where they can trust the facts, they have to do a lot of effort, which is something that the people who are peddling misinformation do not have to do. I hope this is just a very short answer. I'll come back.
Hello. Okay. If I can ask you a follow up question, over the last 4 or 5 months, all of us have seen that there are countries that are now escalating policies around misinformation very rapidly. Like Sweden announced a law saying that your face can be copyrighted, Denmark followed. What is the need of, I mean, honestly, in a country like India, data anyway is not taken very seriously, but what is the need of policy and regulation like that in our country right now?
See, I first of all, India being such a diverse country with catering to such wide information, I do not think we can follow the either the European or the US model here. We need to come up with something that is our own. We need to something that has influence of regional, uh, not only regional dialects but the regional connotation to things. So a background information to what's happening is very much important. While see, I think regulation cannot keep up with tech or whatever is happening with tech. The main thing that we have to do is for advocacy and digital literacy and ensure that people are developing critical thinking, because every kind of bias has been fought with advocacy and critical thinking. So I think, although there could be punitive measures placed on the platform, there could be a number of guidelines that should come out, such as labeling that Sir spoke about, such as content moderation, either through the government or through the platform itself, which are already in place. But these are your supportive measures, not your primary measures. The primary measure still remains digital advocacy, digital literacy, and attacking this bias. That's it.
Thank you. Coming to Uma, I think all of us have seen that we hardly understand the idea of misinformation, the idea of digital threats. Right now, even in urban settings, I came into the room in the morning and I heard, people talking about how their mates are being scammed, how their parents are being scammed, how constantly people are consuming misinformation. And now with AI, and especially generative AI, that is escalating at a very fast pace, at a speed where we cannot even comprehend how to arrive at a point where we can fight it. So when it's happening at scale, what are the safeguards that you see that can be implemented to understand that AI, at least in our work, we've seen that AI is not for good. So what are the safeguards that you find?
Thanks so much, Akanksha, and thanks for having me on this panel. I think there's a couple of different things we should need to talk about or touch upon from what you said. The first is this idea that disinformation is rapidly scaling up. That comes down to, well, what is being amplified, And this comes back to like what sells, right? Sensationalism sells, salacious material sells. We've seen this even before. We had algorithmic kind of content decision makers to say like what comes on your front page that's personalized or customized. Even before that, virality was because something was usually something that was taboo or something that was a scandal. And you're seeing that being perpetuated via algorithms because that's, well, the human tendency. So now you have this on steroids pretty much. So the first issue and the first safeguard we need is on how algorithms determine what gets seen and what isn't seen. The second is about the content itself, right? So first, taking a look at what actually gets amplified, and then also saying, but what is that content? And in order to kind of address that, what we need to look at is we have to look at safeguards that are built with responsibility and safety by design. There's not a lot of money or political will around that concept. This idea of saying, wait, before we release a product that can allow us to have, general purpose diffusion or create images or write a lot of, word salad or, put all these things together, which is pretty much what general purpose tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude do. We need to test them so that way we can see, can they be jailbroken and utilized to create some sort of like existential threat? Help someone design a weapon, help someone design some sort of, non-consensual intimate images, be able to, create a fake statistic that can then be taken up and, populated all across. The evaluation work always lags. One part because, yes, like you said, policy work is always going to lag behind tech innovation, but there's also about political will to do that work. There needs to be an enforcement and implementation of guardrails. So in India, just last week, the India AI mission released their AI governance guidelines, and it's like a set of 10 guidelines that help steer companies towards, what are companies and government agencies towards what are the kind of key principles that we'd like to embed in these systems. And the fifth principle there is about accountability. And what they say is they're saying, by accountability, they mean clear enforcement and also regulation. I think it's important to focus on enforcement because having information, guidelines, tools, frameworks, this is a great first step, but then actually being able to put them into play and say, first, what is content? Are we able to actually stop information that is fake, misleading, malicious, and then also have a higher level system-based regulation and enforcement mechanism to say, can we help prevent that from amplification if and when it eventually occurs? Are the key ways that we can blend social and technical, so socio-technical safeguards together.
Um, I want to go back to Sayed and connect the idea of misinformation being global to hyperlocal. In the work that you've done, have you encountered characteristics that are specifically targeted for the Indian audience? And this can, of course, we have gendered misinformation and we have economic disparity, but according to, like, the work, particularly the work that you do in the legal sphere, have you seen characteristics that are very unique to India?
Yeah. So just going back to the first thing I said about tackling misinformation, the one thing that India has, which is very different from the rest of the world, is the fact that we are a very diverse country. And moving 10 kilometers in any direction would change the dialect, would change the cultural references that are being taken. So I'll just give you an example. And this is not a disinformation example, just an example to tell you how much cultural reference takes place. So, for example, we around 2 3 years ago we came across a video where this is a truck driver who's speaking about his ordeal that on one day he was going through a particular region and he had a tire puncture, but all the tire shops were closed. So then he says, then I realized, oh, it's Eid for Muslims, so a happy Eid to all the Muslims. So now the insinuation is that Muslims are the ones who are mostly involved as tire puncture, who fix your tire puncture, and this is something that is then translated to a number of things. The very famous examples could be could be um, uh, uh, representing, or referring to Christians in as rice bags. This is a context which is set. Understanding that context for India, for a particular region, is essential. Without this context, because you have to understand that the person who's peddling disinformation or misinformation is not a dumb person. They know how to walk their way around the general terms which could uh, pop up the community guidelines in place. So they would most definitely use something which is not directly referring to something but also sending out the message. So for that, the main characteristic of misinformation is what we have seen in the with our own research is most misinformation is not direct, but is there is a subtle context to things on. And if someone is using their critical thinking, it can directly be pointed out, but that's also the main point of that being widely recognized, because they're using localized languages, localized examples to get to a particular community that understands it. So that's one thing. Obviously, the low digital literacy, digital literacy, and basic media hygiene that I spoke about is also something that is happening, and it's somewhat global aspect. But what we have been seeing is that because of this linguistic and cultural reach, the particular, let's say, social media influencers have a larger reach over a very very unique community that understands and relate to that person. So for any other country, you could reach out to social media influencers, put out guidelines for them, but how do you reach out to every single regional social media influencer in, especially in a country like India? So that's one thing. And I think Indians understand the perks of internet very well. The anonymity is one thing that they really understand, and I know this is not a characteristic to India, but the usage of that has been very very rampant with multiple IT cells that we know of. I'm not naming them right now, but you get the point. So, and the last one is that it is always backed by religious, sexual, or community standard bias, which really really helps. So even with what we had seen in Delhi in the past few days, we knew the answers before we got the news. So that might think of us as people who are smart, but we are biased. That bias might result into something that was factually true later on, but that's our bias, initially speaking. So these are a few characteristics which are very, very unique to India and that needs specific addressing. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. I mean, that's really true. And I think one just a follow-up question, because I would even like to know that too, is that, when we talk about this today and yesterday has been about understanding platform accountability. And a lot of the conversation around misinformation is always like, we must hold the platforms accountable because they are the ones pushing this content. But you keep mentioning that critical thinking is something that's missing from the plot always. So, what is the responsibility and the accountability of the user when they consume content like this?
See, and I'm gonna say good old journalism like I'm too old, but with there's when I say the users or the readers or the users' responsibility is that when we used to read news in my childhood, and most people's uh, they were not born or they were like young at the time, we used to rely on sources. For us, the ease of access to knowledge has been such that we have started to literally research anything or cross check anything. We do vertical searches where we find an article, we dig deep into it. We are not going to find other sources. The platforms accountability and platform regulation is something that is definitely important. It has to be there. A platform has to ensure that they are not causing harm. What that accountability is something that I won't go on here. But speaking on the user accountability, I think just to question everything is something that's lacking. And even if you're questioning everything, you should not just get satisfied by a simple answer. I'll just refer to a pop culture movie right now. Okay, so there's this movie called Aankho Dekhi. Right, I don't know if a lot of people have seen it or not. It's a very, I mean, it's two step ahead of what I'm requesting everyone to do. But if you take some ideas of it, aankho dekhi means if you see it you believe it. And I don't mean if you see an article you believe it. You see it means you go through it, you research it. Obviously, my profession is such that pushes me to do this, because if I go and blabber just one article, the judge will kick me off. So maybe be a bit of a lawyer, but an unbiased lawyer, not the general TV show lawyer. So that should help.
Thank you. Coming back to Uma, my second question to you is, how do we coordinate between the landscapes of regulations, the different landscapes of regulations that we see, particularly to target misinformation laws? And what's the first thing, like the first step that you see is relevant to do this?
Actually, before I get into that, I want to reply a little bit to what Syed said. Because I think it's so interesting that the key kind of systemic issue that we face when it comes to disinformation is critical, the emphasis on the word critical, digital and media literacy. In order to do the proper steps that you've outlined, which are correct, you need time, you need capacity, you need context, you need agency. How many of us have that for every single subject out there? It's really hard to be able to do it. And especially in a news cycle that is designed to overwhelm, to flood, where we work by seconds, not by, days or hours, like minutes or days, it's very hard to keep up with everything that's coming through. This might be a very American example, but when I kind of look at, how do you actually address the news hype around, tech-based misinformation, violence, regulation, it reminds me a lot of this very famous scene in I Love Lucy, where they're trying to package the chocolates and the conveyor belt just keeps going and going, and you can't do it in time. That's kind of what it feels like. It's a fire hose of information that's flooding you, and you can only double down and check so much of it. So that's why having technical safeguards, filters, evaluations, algorithmic, kind of, content filters that are put into place to alleviate some, not all, of that burden is incredibly important. And then when it comes to the coordination side of it, it becomes how do we make sure that that exists across geographies, across platforms, in a way that everyone can understand it? Because if the kind of, technical safeguards and codes of conducts that say Anthropic posts is different than what Meta posts, how do I then how do I map that together? What is the kind of, gist of all of it? And how do we then again alleviate the burden on the user in order to be able to kind of reconcile across this? And one of the interesting things here is actually something you had said before, Akansha, which is, in India, data isn't really treated that seriously. Well, the first thing you should do is you have to flip that paradigm. If I'm a user, if I'm a content consumer, I'm more than just a data point. I'm someone who needs to be catered to, not just in what I want to hear, but the high quality of what I want to hear and what I should and need to hear. We somewhere have lost the plot on that. So when it comes to coordination, the first step has to be between governments, I think, in order to create some sort of established universal framework around what exactly are the core universal principles, not just national principles that vary from what the US says, what Canada says, what Singapore says, what India says, and then we have to do the hard work of trying to say, okay, but what does that mean altogether? So first, we need universal governance frameworks. The second is that those frameworks not only need to cover what should happen normatively, but what actually is happening and hold to account industry players, a lot of whom are, as we saw from the opening video, concentrated in one very small, not so small, little town in California, right? So how do we then kind of, coordinate between those local rules and that almost AI localism to the larger context, the national first, right? Because again, California rules don't apply to the rest of the US, and that's a whole other, kettle of fish I won't get into. And then, kind of take that from a national to then a regional to then a global level and be able to hold an industry to account, whether they are located in, if it's an India-based kind of arm of a branch or a Indonesian-based, they're all following the same basic frameworks. This can happen in two ways. This can happen, to close from a technical standpoint, what are the key kind of technical verification models we need, and also from a larger, what is the larger ethos of what we're trying to do. There's a reason why, when I got on my flight from London to come to India, I was totally, like, yeah, it's going to be totally fine, because the air traffic control and the policies and regulations in London mirror those of what happens in India. And I know that the plane that takes off at Heathrow, when it lands in Delhi, it'll be a very similar process and safety and trust assurances as the flight that I took from Delhi to come to Hyderabad. Now, is the process exactly the same? No, but the core principles that underlie airport security are. When we can reach that level of platform accountability for algorithmic and content checking, verification, removal, redress, and remedy, that's how we can tackle the systemic issue that plagues disinformation, which is taking advantage of these gaps that we have among us politically, socially, and exploiting that for clicks, but then also the gaps that we have in our governance, where there's nothing that already exists in regulation to cover a platform, so people don't know how to do it, or politicians don't know how to do it, and then the lack of coordination between country to country, so a platform can feel emboldened to say, well, if you're going to place restrictive rules, we'll go somewhere else, and then you'll lose out on all of the benefits of having us. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for about 2 questions, if there are any. I see a hand already. Yeah.
Accountability and disinformation, misinformation, and critical thinking. I feel generalization is a far bigger problem, because even if we choose critically thinking, but generalization is so rampant. And I think as to beat this platform, we need human intelligence. I think human intelligence is declining. So what are your thoughts?
Definitely. Human intelligence is definitely important, but I think right now with generalization, the main issue is the wide shower of information which we spoke about, of having some assistant with the technical aspect with the platform itself. So I think in order to better achieve, I'm just gonna go back to self control again because if I am spending my time, all my time on brain rot and taking all that content in, it's something that I'm choosing to do, right? I could use the same time to maybe cross check that. I could use the same time to filter out that bombardment of information and cross check a few, make that a pattern, ensure that the whole process, the generalization that is taking place, stops at you, right? So I think it all comes down to individual effort and tackling things one step at a time. Obviously what she said definitely helps and it should be there, but it all boils down to uh, uh, an individual's effort. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew she would have.
I don't like, yes, but no. I want to push back a little bit on what you said.
Yeah.
I think it's an important part, but we also have to be super cognizant of the fact that there's a reason why brain rot or really sensational stuff gets pushed out first, because they know that that's what's going to get people to click and continue to share and like and actually spend time on a platform. So one part is sure self-control, but the other is what are the factors that are being imposed on one in order to consume that information. And when you are nudged in a certain way, nudges are super powerful, and especially when you're being nudged by trillion-dollar corporations who have invested a lot of like trillions of dollars into figuring out how to keep you addicted, uninformed, and beholden to what they're saying at face value. Being able to break that cycle, yes, there are people who can do that, but it's much easier said than done.
Yeah, definitely.
So what we have to do in order to actually enable what Saeed is saying is create systems of education that fight that. Right now, we don't have. I'd love to see if anyone has taken a course or their kids have taken a course on critical digital media literacy in school. It doesn't exist. In Estonia, they've been trying to do this from kindergarten, and it's starting to show some good results. But let's see that diffuse across countries, across institutions, across grade levels, and then being able to revisit this individual self-control is definitely something that I think would be much more doable for the common person.
I understand. I mean, just to add, see, what I'm speaking here coming from a digital rights and privacy perspective. Working in this field, I not only have been exposed to pushed out content, I've also tried to figure out ways to maybe walk around it. For that, I do not use Instagram. I do not use Facebook. If I were to use a social media platform, I'd rather go for an open source social media platform where my clicking on not interested actually makes it not interested. So, but that's a step that you have to take, whether you want security, whether you want comfort, and your privacy depends on that. Obviously, there shouldn't be a trade-off, but this is what corporations do. That's what we have to actually try to understand and see. And this is where I think the whole my perspective and the general perspective comes into play, because I am living the life of grid. But when I say I'm living the life of grid, I am living life of proprietary grid. I'm still living a life on social media. I'm still doing everything which is there. I'm still interacting with people, but I'm doing it on a place that I can control. And thankfully, right now, open source platforms are filled with people who are thinking alike. Yes.
What happens when
when the scales is bigger, then we'll face the same issue, but it's not a content that's pushed by a conglomerate. I know. There are issues with it.
If you want to hear, I guess angel devil advocacy around this, we can continue the conversation.
Okay, go on to the next question.
Thank you. Is there any other question? Yeah.
Who wants to? Okay, then I'll ask. Actually, my question is to Uma. You talked about universal frameworks. What will it take nations to come together and do that? And do you see some hope in future that it will actually happen? And if you think it will happen, what are the sort of the steps that you see that are already happening in that direction?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, one of the key things that we've faced a lot of challenges with in the multilateral kind of AI diplomacy space that I come from has been being able to first align on language. What is it that we mean when we talk about an artificial intelligence system? What does it mean when we talk about safety versus security? It was only in 2019 and then updated, I think, in 2023. The OECD, which is only a certain block of nations, right? So I'm cognizant that that's not a universal definition, but more regionally coordinated than just a willy-nilly one, came up with a definition of what is an AI system, and that was then leveraged for the EU AI Act and kind of made that foundational base of what is it that we're trying to regulate. That's powerful. It helps help make sure that we're all on the same page, or at least this block of countries. And the second is kind of being able to then say, okay, what are these universal definitions? Then principles that we all agree on normatively that we should agree to try and uphold. And then the third part is saying, okay, what is the actual implementation mechanism? So if we take a look at what the United Nations has been doing, they launched this very ambitious Global Digital Compact in mechanism a couple of years ago, which was actually looking into this at that larger, global level, in order to do research on what is it that we need to align on across countries. What are our global priorities? What are the different outlets, mechanisms that we can actually leverage for it? And then how do we actually put those into place? So this was a conversation that was happening a couple of years ago. It's now come to fruition just at the 80th UN General Assembly that happened in September. They had a conversation about what's the next step for the digital compact? And that looks like, number one, a global dialogue on AI, as well as an international independent scientific panel to help us kind of establish a bit of like an established global, verifiable, trusted scientific knowledge base on where are harms, where are risks, where are action items needed. So these are the steps that are happening in the multinational community at the moment. Is it enough? No, of course. There's still much more that needs to happen. And a lot of that is, I think, being able to now translate those high-level dialogues and panels into local contexts and reach that messy middle of saying, how is something that is established in Geneva able to be, applied in context in, Guwahati, and be able to translate through that messy middle from large-scale universal principles to local action. I don't think we're there yet. We're getting there.
Small add-on. Are these 7 big fighting it?
Are these 7?
These
Yes. So from what I know, there's been attempts to engage with the multinational, with the large kind of key AI companies. In terms of the UN, I'm not entirely sure. The information really isn't public. But what I do know is that the only way it's going to be successful is if those companies are brought on board. We can have the most beautiful framework out there with all of the different mechanisms for implementation and action, but unless the actual tools that are being created, designed, and are sold by those companies don't buy in, it's really hard to get these to action. However, that's where advocacy and pressure from governments and from people can help move the needle on, what they see as not only socially and financially viable, but also that kind of larger regulatory pressure. And it's why coordinated mechanisms will help, because it helps address that issue of what we call regulatory flight. So this idea that if I regulate an AI company, they're going to choose to actually leave my jurisdiction, go somewhere where there's more lax jurisdiction that allows me to do whatever I want. This is the way to help fight that.
The last question, please.
So, sir, following up on the example that you have given, how do we tackle biased mindsets?
You're asking me difficult questions now. I don't know, actually. See, bias mindset, I think the answer is the same. Yeah, I mean, answer is the same. You need to question it. If you don't question it, you're a law student, right? So for anything that you say, you have to support your argument by 3-4 case laws that are saying the same thing. And those case laws have their own legal arguments, their own rationale on how you got to that conclusion. So if someone giving you, yeah, you had something to add. Yeah, that's where the sensitization or the literacy comes in. I know it's a difficult thing to task, and you have to be living in an utopian society to have this mindset that, okay, my digital literacy or having a critical thinking might solve everything. But that's hope, and that's a step that you'll have to take. The general public will get influenced, just because the general public is right now being influenced by misinformation. So the general public can be influenced. We just have to find a way how. It's a difficult question you've asked. Understand it. I'm also tackling the way through it. But yeah, there has to be a way. And I think to question everything, to do your own research while being bombarded with a lot of information, while having limited time in a day to go through it, at least a step is required, which if then if then it is spread like an epidemic, might actually help. But this is all hopes and wishes right now, unless people start acting on it. If you have anything to add. Yes.
And on a positive note, there was one of the awardees for the Just AI Awards yesterday was an initiative called Bunk with Kindness. And what it was about was, taking a look at how do we actually reach people who have a view that is potentially led by misinformation, and find a way of telling them, that's probably not true, and here's why. Now, if I say to you, no, you're totally wrong, there's no way that's right, you're stupid, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to actually double down in what I believe, because now it's a personal insult, right? It's that, oh, why is it that you believe something that's obviously false? Well, then you kind of fall into this there's a psychology behind this where you fall into that rabbit hole more and you actually hold on to those beliefs more. And there's been quite a few studies around this in the States looking at political polarization and the rise of the radical right. And I'm sure that a lot of those findings are transferable across the world, across this increased, populist kind of rhetoric and movements that are happening. But what happens if you actually say, well, you could be right, but here's perhaps why not, and leverage a different way of approaching it. You actually open up a conversation. And so being able to have these kind of solutions and then, be able to celebrate them at the DCS and kind of help popularize them a bit more is one of the first steps, because we've seen that there's a way to do things that has been done before and has not really worked. And now you're seeing a lot of these new innovations that are coming in to actually, create ways of saying, how do we actually remedy the issue and try something that's a little bit off the beaten path, but most likely to have higher impact.
I mean, do this in the court as well. It really helps. I've faced judges who do this. And just to say, Your Honor, you're right. However, let me respectfully point out this fact. That really helps. See, in if you're humble enough, you can persuade almost everybody. Yeah, that's it. I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Syed and Uma. There's tea waiting, but I actually, something very, Uma, you rightly said that critical digital literacy has to come from the beginning. So we at DEF developed a module that tackles critical digital literacy, especially in the age of AI. And we wanted to release it with you guys here, if you don't mind. I have the module here. You get to keep the copy as well.